Welcome to the EQ Podcast. All right, welcome to the EQ Podcast, a show focused on equipping ministry leaders in the Pacific Northwest in our Calvary Chapel Association. I'm your host, Zach Lamerson, and with me is Pastor Steve Winery. And we have on the show today Pastor Paul LeBoutillier from Calvary Chapel, Ontario in Oregon. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I noticed on your website you guys make mention of the fact that you guys get people think you're in Canada pretty routinely.
All the time.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and it doesn't help, that our city is Ontario and my last name is French Canadian. So you put those things together and it's just a ball of confusion.
And you're in a weird time zone. I didn't know this till I went down to Emmett to do a New Year's service down. As I'm driving down through Oregon, you guys are in a different time zone than we are in Washington, which is strange. Right. And it's just like a little jet out in Oregon that's in the mountain time zone, and then you guys are like really part of Idaho as well because, your city's right on the border. So you kind of got some weird demographics going.
It's weird all the way around.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think you should speak with a French accent. when people call you asking about Canada. That's what
I would if I could, but I don't think I'm that intelligent. So,
Paul, well, thanks for coming on, man. Would you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, your ministry, and maybe how you got into ministry in the first place?
Wow. Well, how long is the podcast?
We got some time.
Yeah. I started in the ministry just after my wife and I had gone through kind of a marital crisis, and the Lord brought healing and restoration into our marriage. And we got kind of pulled into working with a youth group. And I discovered quite by my surprise that I enjoyed teaching the Bible. And from that, eventually that particular church, which was not a Calvary Chapel, brought me on staff. I spent some time as a youth pastor, and then did a little bit of Bible college up in the Seattle area, and then really was very, very satisfied with living in Seattle at the time. This was back in the 80s, and thought that I would probably stay there forever, but the Lord had other plans and brought us down to Eastern Oregon, where we ended up starting a church. And after about the first year after planting it, we affiliated with Calvary Chapel, and we've just been walking in the grace of God ever since.
How did you get involved in Calvary Chapel in the first place then? Was it through your connection in Seattle then?
Yes, primarily, although I wasn't really aware of it. When I was in Seattle, my tent making job was broadcast radio, and I was working in Christian radio up in Seattle. And one day, a couple of Calvary Chapel pastors came into the studio looking for someone to produce the radio program for one of the guys, and that was Chuck Lind, who was in Olympia, Washington at the time.
Yeah.
And I frankly kind of needed the money, and so I said, yeah, I'll do it. So Chuck Lind started sending me his teachings. This is back on cassette tape, and I would produce them into 15-minute radio programs, ship them back to Olympia, where they would air on the radio station there. And I did that for 7 years. And So here I am being exposed, daily to chapter by chapter, verse by verse teaching. So I tell Chuck Lind, who now lives in our area here in the Treasure Valley, that he's the one who really kind of exposed me in those early years to that type of didactic sort of teaching. And so when we came down here, I was already in the groove of teaching verse by verse, even though we weren't a Calvary Chapel. And then over a period of interesting circumstances, we just got connected with some Calvary people who ended up taking me to a pastor's conference. The first one I ever went to was down in Lake Tahoe. Pastor Chuck was still attending all of the regional conferences, of course, back then. And I got a chance to just hobnob with the guys and find out what it meant to be a Calvary Chapel pastor. And it was shortly after that we affiliated.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you get your journey to Ontario. Maybe tell us a little bit about that. Like, I want to know, just because we have guys who are praying about starting churches or planning churches. What did that look like for you to get out there? Because that's kind of obscure. Like we said, we don't Ontario. I thought Canada when I first heard it. Most people do. I never had heard of Ontario, Oregon until I met you, and so I didn't know where it was. And then it's pretty close to Idaho, pretty close to right, it is Idaho somewhat, and then it's really pretty close to Boise and a lot of those Treasure Valley Calvary chapels down there.
Yeah, about half of our congregation lives in Idaho and the other half in Oregon. So we're a mixed group of people. But it's kind of funny. I had a friend that I went to college with up in Seattle who got a job as a youth pastor in Boise. And this was probably in 85. And he asked if I would help him move down to Boise. And I'd never been to Boise, Idaho. Well, of course, when you come down on the freeway, that takes you right through Ontario, Oregon. Yep. And I remember driving through this area thinking to myself, Lord, I don't ever want to live in a place like this. Because, I loved Seattle and how green it was. The rain didn't bother me. And this, like you guys, this is high desert. And so it's a dry, we call it the brown side of Oregon. And so it was not an area that I was looking to move to by any stretch. When we were up in Seattle through a series of personal connections, I had been contacted about a church here in Ontario that was struggling to find a pastor because they had gotten involved in some bad doctrine over the years. They'd gotten involved in what we came to know as the heavy shepherding movement, where people were told what to do, by their pastor in a very domineering sort of a way. And of course, the church just began to implode, and they had such a poor community image. Nobody wanted to pastor the church anymore. So we were called upon to come down and check out and see, give my opinion, I guess is the best way to put it, on what should be done with the church. And frankly, we came down for the simple reason that we kind of needed a weekend off and away. And we thought it'd be kind of fun, to drive down. So we came down, spent the weekend with the, maybe dozen or so people that remained in this church. Literally, it was like a dozen people. And it was as bad as I had heard. They all needed to just go somewhere and get healthy, So we went back up to Seattle, contacted the people that had contacted us and said, yeah, we think you should just close the door on that little church and just encourage those people to just go find a good Bible teaching church and so forth. And they said, yeah, okay, fine. And then that was the end of the conversation. Well, over a period of days, the Lord just kept bringing this little church fellowship to my heart and to Sue's heart. And we eventually contacted the people that were living down here in Ontario and were still part of the fellowship. There was no pastor. There were just like 2 or 3 families that had been kind of left in charge, And I called one of the guys and I just said, listen, I can't get your little town and church out of my head. And I'm just wondering if this is the Lord. So, and I told him straight out, I said, I'm not willing to come and pastor your church, but what would you think about us coming down and just starting a brand new fellowship? And whoever wants to stay can stay. Whoever wants to go can go, but we'll just start from scratch, because they had a building and they had property. And I remember this guy said to me, listen, we built this, and they literally built the church with their own hands. He said, we built this place to be a church, so we'd rather it be a church than something else, because they were resigned to the fact that their church was coming to an end. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So a few months later, we did just that. We moved lock, stock, and barrel down to Ontario and we started with about 10 to 12 people. And all of them, except one family, left. And in fact, that one family is still with us today, almost 33 years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, it's just been the grace of God ever since.
So Paul, with that whole thing, the church coming out of that kind of doctrine,
Yeah.
what kind of repercussions did you have, like specifically with those families?
Well, most of those families had realized the error that they had been involved in, and the Lord was already doing a work of bringing them out. I'll be honest, the worst repercussions was the community image that was left behind, because the community had also gotten wind of the issues that had gone on there, and the dangers and the excesses and so forth. And so I would say it took us a good 2 years to live down that image, because I think people in the community just assumed that we were the same church with a different window dressing. And when in fact, I had nothing to do with that original fellowship. But, community images can die very slowly. And that was the biggest issue that we dealt with.
How many people were going to the church before you came, before it fell apart? Do you know?
I think at their heyday, they probably got up to a couple of hundred folks. How long they had been decreasing, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me that even if a church is small,
Yeah.
When they go through something like that, the impact it has on the people that have been involved, and sometimes family members down for a long time afterwards, and then
Yeah.
obviously in the community.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was a good lot of legalism that was going on in the church. They were convincing people that the church, that little church, that 5 acres of property was the kingdom of God, and to leave the church was to leave the kingdom of God. And there was a lot of that kind of manipulation, spiritual manipulation that was going on. And it was very, very damaging. I heard from the people that I met that there were many people and many families that had not just left the church, but had actually walked away from the Lord because of it. So, yeah.
I'm curious, have you grown to like the area of Oregon? I assume you have. The dryness, the lack of rain, has it grown on you?
Yeah, it has. It has, yes. It took a while, I will say. In fact, I remember we'd been here about 6 months, and I still was not feeling socially acclimated yet, just because Seattle, to Ontario, Oregon is a pretty huge jump. And I remember getting up one morning before the family was awake. I went out on the couch, and I was just sitting there and spending time with the Lord. And I was praying and I said to the Lord, what am I doing here? And I just sensed the Lord's still small voice saying to me very simply, I love these people. And I love them just as much as I loved those people in Seattle. And it was a very humbling thing that the Lord shared with me, that communicated to me that we were right where he wanted us to be. And that was kind of a watershed event for me, to just kind of put all of my own reservations aside and just be here.
So, Paul, I know your YouTube channel is like off the charts. You guys have an amazing YouTube presence. You have tons of, like, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, which is crazy. How have you grown that ministry, and is it something you'd encourage others to do, but how would you kind of encourage them to do that?
I get that question honestly from pastors a bit, and we never tried to grow our YouTube channel. That was never a goal. Back in 2011, one of my AV guys just simply recommended that we start uploading my teachings to YouTube. We'd been putting them on other platforms up to that point, but it was around 2010, 2011 that YouTube really was starting to come into its own and gain popularity. The platforms, between Android and iPhone, were all coming together with the same apps. And so at the time we thought, let's put those on YouTube, because if somebody misses a teaching from our fellowship, they'll be able to catch up, on whatever study we're doing. never had any inclination that someone outside our fellowship would find us or even want to listen to those teachings. And so it really came as a huge surprise when that began to happen. But honestly, it was really during the pandemic that things exploded. I mean, we were probably at somewhere around 30,000 subscribers in 2019. But when the pandemic hit, in 1 year, we increased by, well, we reached 100,000 in a very short period of time. Now we're at 183 or 84,000. But it was really from 2020 to 21 that caused this huge growth because, people couldn't go to church. Well, in a lot of places and in a lot of countries, people were locked down. And so, they were just looking for ways to stay fed. And I had been uploading teachings for so long, I had the whole Bible up on YouTube, Genesis to Revelation, the whole thing. So it appealed to people to be able to go through the entire Bible. And I think that's probably what really made the difference.
Have you put any resources, money? I know you put staff towards it, but money towards actually improving ads and stuff and doing that kind of stuff on YouTube, or has it just all been organic?
No. Yeah, it's all been organic.
Because I was curious, because I remember, you have I believe it's your daughter and son-in-law, or maybe it's the other way around, who are YouTubers. I mean, that's what they do for a living. And I know they're probably putting money into that stuff, so they haven't influenced you at all with that?
I don't think they've influenced us, and that's my son and daughter-in-law. Yeah,
there you go.
They have 1.8 million subscribers on YouTube. But and we get advice from time to time. Sometimes I'll say I want to buy a new camera or a new microphone or something like that, and I'll go to my son because he's in the thick of that. But other than that, no. I mean, they work so hard doing what they do, and I feel like I'm just pastoring a church, and it's my AV guy that does all the work. I mean, he does the editing and the uploading, and we just sit back and just kind of watch things happen.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you guys, I know Steve gets this too. We get letters from all over the world, people pretty routinely saying how this is impacting, people who don't have a home church say this is we consider this our home church. And so,
yeah. Well, and we've been getting people traveling to Ontario, Oregon, which is crazy, they write to me and they say, I just really want to come visit your church. I want to come to Ontario. And I write them back and I say, you're going to be disappointed.
You built it up too much.
Yeah, I know. Well, they I don't know if people think we live in a metropolis or something, but and people will write and they'll say, well, what's there to do in Ontario? And I say nothing. You need to go to Boise, and I tell them all the things they can do around Boise. But here in Ontario, it's like, no, you don't. This is not a destination spot.
I just probably a month ago, I had on two subsequent Sundays, I had people from some town in South Dakota come out, and they specifically came out because of the whole YouTube thing.
Isn't that crazy? Every Sunday in July, we had people come from Canada, Texas, Louisiana. I mean, every single Sunday we had people coming and saying, this is what we came to do, just to go to church here, for the weekend. And it just blows me away.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is really crazy.
Praise the Lord.
In fact, one gal came from South Africa.
Are you kidding me? Wow.
No, to come to church. Yeah, she's a delight.
Wow.
Yeah.
I noticed, we started our YouTube channel about the same time, and we haven't had that same amount of growth, but it's been a far reaching, I would say outreach. It's done a lot of things in a lot of places, which is cool. But I really found that the common denominator between what you have done and what we're doing is just being consistent to put all of our stuff up there and just kind of, we weren't super organized for a long time. There wasn't a lot of flash, and we didn't have 2 cameras for a long time. And so, it's there's just some real basic things that you don't have to be flashy. You don't have to have the draw. And I encourage guys when they're thinking about this, I'm like, why wouldn't you put it on there? It doesn't cost you a dime.
Right. I mean, and the potential is so great. When we first recognized that some people outside our fellowship were watching, after we got over the shock of that, we started to pray that God would use those messages in places where, the gospel is dangerous to talk
Yeah.
about. We began to pray, that the message would get into Muslim nations and other places where they could, in the privacy of their home, hear the gospel and learn about what the Bible has to say. And the potential there is just incredible to reach people for the Lord.
Have you had that happen? Muslim countries?
Yes, absolutely. I've had quite a bit of back and forth with people in Pakistan, and some other places, and some of them are Muslim, some a lot from India as well, where you're dealing with those particular religious persuasions. But yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah, we've had some guys from Afghanistan, a guy from
Yeah.
Pakistan, and that's really interesting. That's
Yes.
a very cool thing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And I've told guys too, as far as setup, because I get a lot of tech questions. Like your
Yeah.
phone can record you and live stream you on YouTube, and it
Yeah.
actually will probably do better than most cameras out there right now. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason why someone can't do it. And that's I just wanted to point that out because I feel like it's such a cool ministry, teaching through the Bible verse by verse. It's not unique, but it's needed, and there's a lot of Christian culture that doesn't
Boy.
have it. And so, if they can grab onto it, man, it's awesome.
If
So,
there's
Paul,
one consistent message that I have heard from people who are watching from all parts of the world, is we don't have this in our area. There's nobody teaching through the Bible. They will occasionally reference the Bible in a 30 to 45 minute message that has nothing to do with the scripture they just read, but we don't have people actually teaching us what the Bible says or what a book of the Bible is all about. It's gotten to be very, very rare in many parts of the world, and that's a shame. And so we have this incredible opportunity to be able to share the systematic teaching of the Word. It's really amazing.
So, Paul, if you're going to tell a guy who hasn't gotten on YouTube, I can't imagine that most younger guys today don't know how to do this stuff.
Yeah.
But if you were going to tell them how to do it and how to get started, kind of a nuts and bolts thing, what would you tell them?
Well, kind of like Zach was saying, start small, start simple. We started with a home, camera, one of the kind of little handy cam or something like that by Sony, I think. And the picture quality was awful. Mm-hmm. And, but you do what you can do. Cameras are so much better, as you were saying now. Being able to record with a cell phone camera and the audio from whatever source you're getting it from, it's easy to edit these things today. Pretty much anybody can do this, and just start uploading the things to YouTube. It doesn't take a lot these days, frankly, to do it and to look good and to sound good.
Yeah. Comparatively, I was just thinking back, you edited radio programs back in the 80s. How long did it take you, just for my own reference, to edit one program back then?
Well, you do everything in real time. So, I would imagine a 15-minute radio program would probably take about 45 minutes to listen through, figure out what you want to do, what areas you want to edit in and so forth, and then put it all together.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, we still, in our radio program, still listen in real time. So nothing, that part hasn't changed. I was just curious. Your wife is on staff at the church. I know she's a huge support, and she organizes pretty well. I've talked to some of your staff about it actually, and just her skill set and what she does there. Can you give our guys a feel for what that looks like and how she's how helpful she's been to your ministry there?
I suppose I can. My wife she's first of all a Bible teacher in her own right, and way more popular on the retreat circuit than I am. She does several women's retreats around the country every year, and has gotten to be a fairly in-demand speaker. But at the church, she does so many things. She oversees our worship ministry. She oversees our financial ministry. She does all of our personnel. just so many things. And
what do you do, Paul?
I sit around and teach the Bible. That's about it. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fantastic. Sue didn't come on staff obviously until our kids were grown and out of the house, because she actually homeschooled all 4 of our kids from kindergarten through graduation. And so she was a very, very busy woman during those years, because she also was doing what she could, of course, at the church. She was never uninvolved. She was always involved in some capacity, whether worship ministry or children's ministry and women's ministry. But once she was able to come on staff, oh, I tell you, what a delight. I mean, she does so many things for me behind the scenes. You were talking about our YouTube channel, and I used to try to answer every single email that we received that was like, Bible question related or whatever. And I was spending 2 hours a day, just answering Bible questions. Well, that got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. Mm-hmm. So Sue is now the one who fields all those questions, whether they come on the YouTube channel or through our website or whatever. And she puts them into a single document, a Google document. And then once a month, we do about an hour-long Q&A. In fact, we just got done recording it today, this morning. And but she does all of that organization and administration for me. She is just an enormous help.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know. So again, we've had other guests on, and some of them have their wives on staff. Some of them, their wives help out, their worship leaders or whatnot. And then, just kind of depends on, I guess, your relationship dynamic, how that works. And like you said, with you guys, you waited till your kids were out of the house or graduated at least before she was able to fully engage, which I think was wise too.
Well, one of our philosophies of ministry over the years with other women was, if you have small children in the home, that needs to be your primary focus. Mm-hmm. You're taking care of those kids and nurturing them, and we tried to discourage women from getting too involved in other areas of ministry while they still had children in the home, because the last thing we wanted to do was to cause them to neglect, their ministry in the home. And so it was just kind of consistent with the way we treated other ladies, other women, and that sort of thing. But and you said that a pastor's wife can sometimes be dependent on the relation dynamic there. It's also very dependent on her gifting, because obviously these women are gifted very differently as far as pastors' wives go, and I think that there's a lot of pressure on a wife to conform to particular standards that people have as far as expectations for a pastor's wife, and not every pastor's wife fits those expectations in terms of her gifting. And so that can be a very, very challenging thing for a woman to deal with, for a pastor's wife specifically.
Yeah. One of the questions my wife always got was, do you play the piano?
Oh, yeah. 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 And of course, mine never did, because she does. And, and she plays very well. In fact, in the early days of our church, Sue and I led worship, because there was nobody else to do it, and Sue's really good at what she does, and I just barely, got along. But my wife is one of those crazy ladies who is multi-talented and does so many things so well that I can't imagine doing ministry without her. And I know I'm talking to 2 guys whose wives are incredibly involved in ministry as well. And I would venture to bet that you guys feel the same.
Absolutely.
100%.
Oh, my wife makes me look good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know what that's like.
Yeah.
You also have several young guys on staff, just looking, and I've met Aaron, and then his younger brother, I assume, is your youth pastor. So how do you cultivate that? I know there's some guys, they want to get the younger guys involved. They want to raise up that generation. How have you cultivated that at your church?
You know what? Both of those guys started coming to our fellowship. I think Aaron, who's, my assistant, I think he was maybe 5 or 6 years old when his family started attending our fellowship, and Ryan was even younger. So they were cultivated just in the life of the fellowship. And that's, to me, is the most effective way. I've never honestly really had to reach out and like hire outside of the fellowship. I had one guy who was raised up through the fellowship. He went away, was involved in ministry for a while, and I did draw him back to be in area. He was a youth ministry worship leader, an AV tech person, but he had also come up through the fellowship. So I don't know that I've never really tried to nurture that sort of a thing. It's just happened organically.
Yeah, Steve knows something about that. I mean, as far as bringing people back who try to leave, he's had guys who've tried to get away.
Brandon's coming back, Paul.
Is he really?
Once again,
Brandon. All right.
Yeah, that's really cool.
But he was an outside hire. He was one guy that we brought in from the outside. But
okay.
We knew him, though.
We did know him. All right, here's our lightning round questions. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, number one, who's your go-to pastor, dead or alive, to listen to?
I only have to pick one?
You get one.
I get one to listen to. Wow. I would say one of the most impactful pastors that I've listened to over the years was Damian Kyle from Calvary Chapel, Modesto.
Yeah. He's actually been one of the popular choices when I've asked guys that. They really like Damian.
Yeah. And obviously that's not the only one, but I would say in some of my more formative years of learning as a pastor teacher, Damian Kyle was hugely impactful.
All right. Number two, what's a recent good read, a book that you would suggest to other pastors? Like, hey, this is one you should check out.
Boy, you're putting me on the spot here. A recent good read. Wow. Can we come back to this one?
How about a good read in general? One you would suggest to pastors?
I have loved and they're not new, but I have loved all of the Fresh Faith, Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire books by the pastor of Brooklyn Tabernacle Church, who his name is completely out of my brain right now. Come on, you guys.
People have Google. They'll be able to find it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire. Incredible book.
Okay. Last question is, what is one piece?
By the way.
Okay. After we're done.
After we're done, yes.
Yeah. What is one piece of advice you have for someone who either wants to get into full-time ministry or is in full-time ministry?
Do what you can do and don't try to do what you can't do. That's probably one of the biggest challenges that I find for pastors starting out or pastors of smaller churches. Is that they're trying to meet too many needs. They're trying to be the church that is going to have all of the offerings that people are looking to have. And you can only see so many people walk away from your church because they'll say, well, we're going to go to a church. We need to go to a church where they have a youth group, or we need to go to a church where they have, this or that. And that's very demoralizing over a period of time. And so pastors are under great pressure to try to be what they are not and do what they really are not equipped to do. And it causes great pressure. It fosters burnout and discouragement. And it puts pressure on the people that you're joined or linked with to do ministry with. And so one of the things I tell pastors over and over again is just do what you can do. Do what the Lord has enabled you to do, but be careful. Don't go beyond that.
Thanks so much, Paul. That's great advice. All right. I appreciate you coming on the show, man. I look forward to hanging out with you. You'll be at the Pastors Conference here in the next month?
I sure hope so.
All right. Good to see you, man.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks. God bless.
Right. God bless you.
The EQ Podcast is here as a resource for our listeners. Check us out at eqministry.com. On our website, you'll find a variety of helpful tools, including past ministry conferences and a contact form to seek out help or counsel from seasoned Calvary pastors who want to encourage you in your serving or answer your ministry-related questions. Until next time, God bless.